Order online at picassospizza.net.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to this Trainwreck Sports podcast where we are here to pay the bills. It is Tuesday, January 20th, and our Bills worlds have shaken to its core since the last time we talked to you. Saturday, another heartbreaking, crushing playoff defeat in overtime, this time to the Denver Broncos. And then yesterday, the news, at least some of the news, some of us have been maybe expecting or hoping for anywhere else among Bills Mafia, wherever you've been at, but not the way I think any of us expected it to go down and the reaction to it and everything else. Sean McDermott fired, let go as head coach of the Buffalo Bills, while Brandon Beane is retained not only as GM, but promoted to president of football operations, and everything will go through him going forward after another playoff failure for the Buffalo Bills. So not an exciting, fun, celebratory episode as we were hoping for. There's a lot to get into. AJ, I'm going to start with you and go around the horn. What angle of this news, and if you want to talk about the game first, more than welcome to, but what angle of the McDermott news of the whole weekend shocked you the most, and is your main takeaway, like the main thing that's been on your brain for the last 24 to 72 hours of Buffalo Bills news?
Yeah, so I'll start with I think in terms of the football game, it's rinse and repeat. I don't really have much to say about it other than they had many opportunities to close that game out, both offensively and defensively. They fell behind. Josh Allen brought them back. Ultimately couldn't get it done when it mattered most. Again, both offensively, defensively. Turnovers really killed them. Josh's turnover at the end of the first half was, brutal. And they just couldn't, the emotion at the end of that game, as that was all happening, it is sad because a lot of these guys have just been through it so much. You think of the Jordan Poyers, the Trey Whites, the Matt Milanos, the Daquan Jones, the Ed Olivers, the Greg Rousseaus, obviously Josh Allen, James Cook now has a lot of playoff failures under his belt. It felt very defeating to lose, and especially with the ref controversy at the end and how that was handled, was just sad. And it was just very defeating, I think, from a player perspective and fan perspective, to go to bed that night thinking, where do we go from here? Now, flipping the page, like I said, I don't really want to talk much about the game because, again, I feel like it's just been, playoff shortcomings year in, year out. I was shocked on Monday morning when I found out that Sean McDermott was fired by Terry Pegula. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, I was about an 8 when I got that notification. I woke up. First reaction, I was always, I was critical of McDermott earlier in the season. Later in the year, you look at the wide receiver room and the D-line room and what's kind of been established there, whether the defensive line has a McDermott kind of touch in there. I was becoming more critical of Beane, and I thought after, the playoff failure that if one was going to go, I wanted it to be Beane, because I think his inability to build a team here the last couple of years, and I know last year they were successful, and they do have good rosters, and I don't think they're as bad as people make them seem, but I do think it was a lot of coaching up defensively by McDermott. So I was of the idea that, I think Beane should go, but I wanted them both gone. I've been very critical of Sean too. I actually said in 2022 that I want to give him a couple more years, and if he doesn't do it, I want him gone. So I'm fine with the hiring. The PR and the optics of it is where I have a hard time with how they handled it. And I know it ultimately doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, but I do think that the team handled it in a poor way. I thought Sean McDermott's his response to the firing was very, well said, and what Buffalo's meant to him. And I always thought he's stood up for Buffalo, and he's given me some of my best memories as a fan, and I'll always appreciate him. But I do believe it was time to move on from him. But I also thought Beane should have been out the door with him. I think, the GR thing, I know we're going to come full circle. That we'll probably talk about it in this show. And this is the last thing I'll say. I'm a little bit all over the place, but I want to touch on the GR thing and how Bean handled all that. I do think whether the media created that narrative, Brandon Bean did it to themselves. And I listened to the Bruce exclusive after that all went down. And as a general manager in that moment on the radio show, I know you're defending your team, you're defending your choices, but I just didn't like the optics of that decision to do that on the radio. I understood where he was coming from, but that, you're putting such a stain on yourself if it doesn't end up working out like it did. And I think, although that might be fueling kind of the shift in the narratives from Bean being the one that's fired or wanting Bean to be fired by majority of the fan base when it used to be McDermott, I do think that Brandon Bean's choice that day is a big part of this and is a big part of the conversation, because me and Bud talked about it earlier. I don't think Brandon Bean is as bad of a general manager right now as the public perception of him. But at the same time, because of the choice he made there, because of, I think, the questions along the defensive line and in the depth of the defensive, the defensive side of the ball, and obviously the lack of receivers, I do think, there's obviously a lot of questions with what he's done. And we're going to hear about that at 10 o'clock tomorrow. So overall, I kind of said what I said. I wanted them both gone. I would have rather had Bean gone. But it is what it is at the end of the day. I still think Bean can, make the right hire. I'm not totally checked out, but the pressure's on him. And we'll hear from him at 10 tomorrow along with Terry Pagula to see kind of where this is going, where this is headed. And again, terrible optics, I think, to promote Brandon Bean and fire McDermott after this year. But that's the choice they made, and you just got to live with it and move on.
Yeah, so I remember I was listening to GR Live, actually. So I heard this go down as it happened. And I just needed to take a moment because, wow, they actually did it. And then, of course, now I'm scrolling social media and saying, okay, what about Bean? What about Bean? And a few minutes later, I think it comes out, I forget which NFL insider comes out and says, okay, Brandon Bean's not only safe, he's promoted. Now, anybody who's covered the Sabres and had to deal with Terry Pagula on that side of things knows that he needs his comfort zone. He needs, for lack of a better way to say it, his yes man, people he can depend on, people he feels he can trust. And for some reason, because Brandon Bean's been, as has been reported, he's sitting up there watching the games with Terry Pagula. Obviously, Sean McDermott's got a job to do on the field, so he can't do that with the owner during the game. Obviously, Terry feels he can trust Brandon for whatever reason more than he can trust Sean. Obviously, the players feel that they can trust Sean, and that's why so many of them, former and current, are coming out and saying this is BS. But then again, there are so many coaches around the league that got fired, especially a couple of veteran ones in Baltimore and Pittsburgh, that players are coming out in support of him saying, hey, either, we're going to miss you, or this is the wrong move, or whatever. Of course, Mike Tomlin's voluntarily stepped away, but it's the same sort of sentiment. And it's the same sort of idea that after so many bites at the apple and not being able to get there, or having not gotten there for, over a decade and a half, maybe in the case of Baltimore and Pittsburgh, you just have to get a change of voices in the room and try a different approach. As far as Brandon Bean and his approach to the media is concerned, I think, first of all, I think that's played a big part in the perception of both Sean and Bean in the last year or so, because in years past, when it comes to the playoff failures, and we can go over all these statistics about how the defense came up short in all these playoff losses, more recent and all the ones in the past, and there's a few stats to go over. But obviously, Brandon showing up at the GR show, and I made it a point on that very day to go back to the previous segment before Brandon Bean had come on and hear, okay, what were Jeremy, Joe, and they were actually talking to Sal at the time, talking about what context were they saying, and they were trying to figure out why there wasn't as much big acquisitions since the Stephon Diggs trade at wide receiver, and all this capital was invested into the defensive line and other places. And they were simply going to ask Brandon Bean, do you not value wide receiver the same way that the other GMs in the league seem to do? Not so much that you don't value wide receiver, or it was just, do you not value it as much? do you think that it's not as important once you have a quarterback and you'd rather pour your resources into other places? And Brandon must have gotten a secondhand account of what they were talking about. And of course, Jeremy is one to, pound the table on the wide receiver train, choo and all that. And he must have gotten the impression that they were just laying into him about, not having a great bunch of wide receivers again. And he just blew up at him for whatever reason. But it wasn't just that. It was going on Pat McAfee show and mocking people for wanting wide receivers, saying, you guys play too much fantasy football and that sort of thing. And then there's also offhand rumor that supposedly he didn't like PFF's grades and personally threatened to pull business over them for some reason. So Brandon Beane has been coming across at Bunt. You don't particularly care for that, or it doesn't matter one way or another.
I'm sorry.
It's just been, Brandon Beane's impression has been in the last year or so has been coming across as a little bit more of a condescending person rather than, big baller who will go make the trades and make the free agency acquisitions. And especially in this particular trade deadline when there were maybe one or two wide receivers to be had out there, and he just sat pat, and Sean McDermott proceeded to, laud one or two of those said players, especially when we were about to play those particular teams that did acquire them. And that must have stuck in Brandon Beane's craw, I imagine. But that's why the sentiment and the polls going around were once the Denver game was over, would you rather have Sean gone or would you rather have Brandon Beane gone? In years past, it probably would have been more 70 or 80% going towards Sean McDermott. And now it's more 80, 90%, we'd rather have Beane go before Sean. So my only question is, and we'll get into some of the specifics and the stories that have been coming out in certain people's articles and their sources and whatever. Is it really Brandon Beane drafts the players and Sean coaches them, or is it more so Sean says, get me this guy and get me that guy by whatever means you have to, and Brandon does what Sean tells him to do? Or is it a split of it? Maybe Sean says, get me this guy in the first round, and you can have whatever you want in the rest of the rounds. That's only, I mean, even if we knew, okay, that's a Brandon Beane guy, that's a Sean McDermott guy, at the end of the day, it's a team effort and it's a team failure when they don't get to the Super Bowl like they should. Yeah. So there's probably going to be, busts on both ends as far as, who's favorite, who was the favorite guy of this guy, who was the primary advocate for drafting this guy or acquiring this guy or trading for this guy. So it may all end up being a wash, but maybe if what the team release, misspellings and everything, if what the team release impression is giving is that this is going to be more Beane's team than in previous years, saying that it was Sean's team before. If it's going to be more Beane's team, and depending on, of course, which coaching hire they go out and get, which everybody has their favorites, everybody has their no ways on this guy or that guy or bringing back this guy, it's going to shape a lot of how the perception is. And obviously, regardless of what we perceive, regardless of what the stories are, regardless of, who's finger pointing at who, winning cures all ills. And if they go out and win the AFCs with 12 and 13 wins next year, it'll be like, okay, at least it didn't get worse. Now, how far can you take us? And that's going to be the ultimate judgment for whatever the shape of this team is going forward. Bunt?
Yeah, a lot of good things that you just said there. I think everything that has transpired over the last 36 hours, 2 days, whatever the time frame, is laughable and kind of disappointing. I say laughable because the fact of it is none of this is going to impact, meaning the product on the field. They're going to make moves. Obviously, this is going to impact the head coach and
Kevin Adams impacted, right?
We're talking about PR right now. That's the thing that bothers me the most. We're talking about PR, and at the end of the day, the Bills butchered it. But the part that bothers me the most about this is everyone, fans, media, content creators, we're all coming out on these shows. We're all putting together strong, opinionated tweets, and we don't know one thing about what happened behind closed doors that led to this. We have no idea the power dynamic of who was more responsible for certain decisions, why they did things the way they did them, and how Terry came to this conclusion. We are making all of these opinions based on hearsay and just random things. Let's be real. When Stephon Diggs was rumored to be on his way out of Buffalo, who was talking about it the entire time? The national
Stephen
media.
A. Smith.
National media. What was the local media saying during the entire time? No, he's not.
It's just hot air.
Yeah. Bill. When it was rumored that Sean McDermott could get fired if he lost early in the playoffs and didn't get to a Super Bowl, who was saying all that stuff? National media. Who was telling us that's not going to happen? That's not legitimate. The local media. I am so tired of the local media driving these narratives that aren't even correct. From early on in Sean McDermott's career to year 6 or 7, the local media kept saying Sean McDermott has more power than Brandon Beane, and that Sean McDermott drives decision making as far as the roster. Then Brandon Beane magically goes on GR one day and criticizes their staff. And then what happens? The same people that have been on McDermott's hot seat for 3 years are now not talking about McDermott. They're standing up for McDermott. They're now on Beane's case. So they flip-flop.
Can I just not to interrupt your train of thought, but back to the whole national media knows a little bit more than we should give them credit for. Wasn't it Jason La Canfora that had Rex Ryan getting fired in his final season before anybody else? And there wasn't, and Doug Whaley going out wasn't really predicted by anybody. Were there?
Yeah. The point of it is we're seeing a lot of hypocrisy right now, and we're seeing how the local media basically creates narratives within the fan base through their influence, and how that makes the local fan base and the national fan base react. The fact of it is, I said on Saturday that if the Bills lost, I think they should fire Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane. And people were killing me for it. But 2 years ago, when I said that they should keep Sean McDermott, I was getting killed for it at that point in time. So for 2 years, I'm a homer because I want them to keep Sean McDermott. And then the moment I say I think they should fire Sean McDermott, I'm a hater. But then, because I'm not killing them for keeping Beane, I'm a homer again. What I don't know.
I think in this particular season, because of all the injuries that have happened and the empty cupboard at wide receiver, and then half of those guys weren't even available in the playoff. I think people were lauding Sean McDermott a little bit more for giving him the credit for the coaching job he did with little he had to work with.
You are right, Partham. The problem about this whole thing is there's been a lot of this. They're attached at the hip. So the reality is, the local media has been telling us they've been attached at the hip for 9 years. Obviously, they aren't. Obviously, that was a lie. So the local media doesn't know what they're talking about. I hate to say it. So if they weren't attached at the hip, when did this falling off start? And I think the truth of the matter is we don't know what the true power dynamic was. And we're left to speculate. Was Brandon Beane responsible for all the draft picks and all of the free agent moves and all of the acquisitions for the Bills? Or did Sean McDermott have influence? Do you think that a general manager is going to choose to bring back 32-year-old former has-beens on the team that have barely any NFL life remaining over 25-year-olds that have more athleticism, more speed, more strength? You think a general manager is going to choose that? No, that's a general manager giving the coach who the coach wants because he has familiarity and continuity with those guys. We have, when you run a nickel defense, which is not what 90% of NFL defenses are, despite what you'll hear by local content creators, you need to have certain players that fit your system. So let me ask you this. If Brandon Beane saw what he thought could be a dominant, a 6'3", 240-pound linebacker, but maybe he's a tad slow. Do you think Sean McDermott wanted that guy? Or do you think he would take the 6'2" linebacker that's 220 that can cover? I think we have ample evidence that there are certain selections that were pro-McDermott picks that maybe McDermott wasn't the one that made the decision, but Beane makes picks based on giving McDermott what he's looking for. We don't know. Does Brandon Beane think that running a nickel defense is what should be the Bills' base defense? What if Beane thinks the Bills should have a more aggressive defense that's based on pass rush and less focused on the secondary and more on stopping the run and other things? And he's drafting guys to fit the McDermott system. What if Pagula knows that Beane is basically drafting for McDermott and what he wants, and that Beane has had numerous examples of wanting different players? These are the issues. We don't know those answers. And the other problem I have with this whole thing, it's a power struggle. Ultimately, you like neither side to win, because at the end of the day, both people have been a huge role in the turnaround of this Bills franchise. And I want to say that they both have equal contributions to it. Brandon Beane took a chance of a lifetime taking Josh Allen in the draft when he was considered a joke of a prospect by several people. And that will forever be his home run. But Sean McDermott gets credit for turning the culture around in building up a team and taking them to the playoffs, ending a drought, and then building up the confidence to give him the reins and to give him the power. And this is the part I hate the most. Everybody's acting like it's just Brandon Beane that's sabotaging Sean McDermott. It's a two-way street. They were battling it out, both of them. How many times did Sean McDermott say, you're going to have to talk to Brandon Beane about that decision late in the year? Or I like that player on that team. Sean McDermott was taking jabs at Brandon Beane the entire second half of the season. And Brandon Beane privately was taking shots at Sean McDermott because they were both worried about their job security. It's self-preservation. That is what the NFL is. That's what professional sports is. They were trying to keep their jobs. And now because one person won and another person lost, we're acting like the one person's evil and the other person's innocent and a great human. That is not the truth. And that is why I get frustrated in all this stuff, because deep down, let's be real. And we can talk about, is this the right move? Is this the wrong move? I'll just say this. Say Sean McDermott is still the head coach next year, and they got rid of Brandon Beane. New GM gives the Bills players that they want. The Bills are up 27-23 on the Kansas City Chiefs with 2 minutes left. Do you trust that the Bills defense is going to hold Kansas City out of the end zone to win the game in that moment? If your answer is no, that means you don't truly believe in Sean McDermott. But let's be real. 95% of us would say no to that answer. And that there is why he's no longer the head coach. Because the Bills are not firing him because of his season this year. And this is what needs to be said. Sean McDermott did not get fired because he went 12-5 and won a playoff game this year. Sean McDermott did a tremendous job with probably the weakest Bills roster of the last 6 years. He got fired because they have fallen short 6 consecutive years with teams that were good enough to make a run. And ownership basically came to the conclusion, we don't believe you are ever going to get us over the top to a Super Bowl with Josh Allen. So Josh is going to be 30. We have limited chances left. If not now, when? Now, the only thing, the saving grace for Brandon Beane in this conversation is this. If he has been drafting based on what McDermott wants, if he has been giving McDermott the players that he wants, instead of going the direction that Beane deep down feels is right for the team, who would know that? A person that you're talking to every day as the owner of the team. Deep down, only Terry Pagula knows what really went on behind the scenes. And this might curse the organization and set them back, just like the Sabres. But they have Josh Allen at quarterback, who's the best player in the world. And 75% of winning in the NFL is having a great quarterback. So, long story short, they're probably going to be okay. We can talk about the merits of everything, but they're probably going to be okay.
I think the biggest thing that worries me about, and that was a very, but Mike, you always continue to surprise me because I didn't know if you'd be the person preaching the most optimism out of all of us following this move. Honestly, I was wondering where you, especially as the guy who did not pick the Bills and then trolled not pick the Bills and all these things that Mike's been up to this whole year. But you make a lot of good points, and it's specifically about like, hey, remember where we really felt about McDermott. Like it's I think a nostalgia is seeping into a lot of this, like the feelings and emotions of fans right now, because the guy, now that it's done and the way it went down and everything, it just makes you feel a certain type of way. It makes you feel bad for a guy that's been there for a long time. It's still so raw after another, like, basically the greatest hits of heartbreaking Bills losses. Like they just keep them, like whatever. It was just one thing after another that we've seen in past of these disappointing games. In that game specifically, we really just missing a missed kick because Prater was like the MVP of the playoffs. The dude's electric. Can they keep him going for 10 more years or something? But the Pagula of it all is what concerns me, because the notion with these two guys, when they were paired together, since they've gotten them, since we've seen everything happen on the other side of the enterprise with the Sabres, is that, man, he got really lucky. He lucked into Bean and McDermott, right? Like that's a lot of the talks. Like he found the perfect two guys, didn't touch their structure, didn't do anything, and they built what they were able to build together, which was one of the most consistent, if you're just talking games won, not Super Bowls, the most consistent winner of this decade. And the playoff failures are what are the biggest thing that come through. Okay, that's great. Well, now Terry, he's involved in this structure one way or the other. And there is no, oh, he lucked into it and left his hands off of it. And there's more evidence that when Terry gets his hands involved and start doing things, that it doesn't work, that it hasn't worked than it has. Now, the point that you make about Josh Allen is a great point. His role in this entire thing it's extremely vital, because if McDermott was putting up these years with a, middle tier quarterback and a great defense, he's here, right? Like if they're having playoff failures with, two different middling quarterbacks and a great defense with a defensive coach, he's probably safe. It's probably a different thing. The story of this is you had Josh Allen and you couldn't get it done. Now there's another side to this whole story when you look at the entirety of the league, and it's a national narrative I've heard. We talked about it in our group chat. It's a national narrative that I've heard starting up. I heard Colin Cowherd discussing it today. I've heard a couple other podcasts start mentioning it. Hey, look at the teams who have left. I mean, the Rams are paying, I guess, Stafford $48 million, but it's not $60 million. And we know that that's more towards the end of his career. Darnold's making about 30. Drake May's on his rookie contract. And the bigger, high-priced quarterbacks right now, the Allens, are out of the playoffs. The Mahomes, the Burrows, the Jacksons, the Prescotts, the Jordan Love phases out early on. Like all these guys that are getting big contracts, and they're like, is this, when you build the team around the super high-priced quarterback, can you win? Can you win with all the other holes on the roster it presents? This year, when you look at it from a flashpoint, it's no. And so then it comes down to, okay, well then how did this roster get constructed? Because knowing that with the quarterback, you have to accept that flaws are going to happen and figure out where you're willing to not have those holes. And where the Bills' biggest glaring holes were on the defensive line, I would say, when you're not even affecting Bo Nix in a playoff game again. And obviously the wide receiver position where there's a lot of, we've talked about it at length. So I don't want to go belabor it, but it is important to the conversation.
Can we talk about it a little bit though? I'll let you finish your point.
Yeah.
What I want to discuss after you're done with your point is why did Bean make the decisions that he made? Because I think there's a lot of this talk. Well, there's no blue chip talent on this team. This team lacks talent. And I think there's a lot of misdiagnosing what the Bills actually are versus the rest of the league. And I also think there's a little bit of recency bias where we're forgetting why the Bills went the direction that they went in several positions. And when you revisit the why they did it, it's more understandable. And I think a lot of people are playing hindsight where it didn't work out instead of looking at there was reasons behind it. But
there's always reasons behind it, though. But go ahead, Jake.
No, but these reasons were at the time people supported stuff.
Correct.
But
that's how it always.
And my point was kind of in line with that, is that we don't know. We don't know at this moment for sure, but we have a sense that McDermott had a say in a lot of the guys that were getting picked too, and the types of people they're going after, and the types of frame and everything else. Like, it was a collaborative thing. Was it something that Bean wanted to do in all these positions? Who knows? We at one point we knew him to be the guy to be taking a lot of big swings, and then all of a sudden they weren't taking the big swings, and so something happened fundamentally, philosophically, with how they decided they were going to build the team. Likely, you see the through line of it when they stopped trying to make, kind of this year, some mid-tier splashes and everything else. But the Von Miller trade is really the last move that we've even heard them. And then going into this year, there's some of the Waddle stuff and everything else. But there was no real talk over the offseason of them. There was a lot of fans hoping for them going, for a wide receiver 1 or Myles Garrett or anything else. But I don't think there's ever any serious kicking of the tires. So who does that come down to? And that's where when Mike, you talk about a power struggle, like, that's why everybody should be mad about a power struggle, because it means there was a failure somewhere. Like, a power struggle usually doesn't happen when everything is rosy, right? Unless you're the New England Patriots. And even they were able to figure out their power struggle for longer than most teams and most organizations are able to do it. But once these kind of things start to simmer, it's going to boil over in some way, but that doesn't mean that, like you said, doesn't mean there's a guy who's right and wrong here.
This comment out. I think this played a role.
Yeah.
To be honest, I think that McDermott had the power for a long period of time. And I think as time went by, Bean took some of that power away or stopped doing what McDermott wanted. And that's when McDermott became more vocal, because he realized his job is on the line and he wanted Bean to give him what he wanted. And Bean, I think, was less cooperative about it.
So wouldn't that be a failure for both? Then what? So if you're speculating,
that is a failure on both. And that's why I said both should be fired. But let's address the receiver issue. Why did the Bills go from all of these good receivers to suddenly this group of shit? Well, I think there's a pretty obvious couple answers. One, when you have Cole Beasley, John Brown, and then Stephon Diggs, you still had Josh Allen on a rookie contract. So you had the money to afford them. That's number one. Number two, they extended Stephon Diggs. And if people don't remember, when they traded him, he had $30 million in dead cap hit. They had barely any cap space, not this last offseason, but the offseason before, to make any move. Why did they settle for Curtis Samuel? That's all they could afford at that point in time. It was bare bones. They had to get it by. And what did everybody say going into Josh Allen's MVP season? The thought was that we're going to learn if Josh can carry the rest of the team himself or if he needs better weapons. What did Josh do? He carried them within one drive of going to the Super Bowl. They went to the AFC Championship. He wins MVP. You know what that does? That double downs your approach that what we did was working. And what people don't want to acknowledge was there was a lot of conflict between Diggs and Allen. There was a lot of conflict that he was a diva who always wanted the ball and had issues with Josh inside that locker room. And Josh privately told people he thought he could win without him and that he didn't need a Stephon Diggs to be effective. And to his case, he won an MVP without him. This past year, they were fourth in DVOA. So they've had great offenses still. They've lacked the deep passing threat in a receiver, but that's the why. It's lack of money. And then they had success on offense. Now look at the defense. Why do the Bills get the type of people they do on defense? Well, if you look in the past, they went to get Von Miller because they had no pass rush against the Chiefs, and they needed to fix that. So they tried to get a guy, and they went all out, and he was playing great, and then he tears his ACL. But they have so much money invested in him. What does that do? And you can say that's a miss on Bean, but that's more of an injury, but older player, so you got to acknowledge injury risk. The Von Miller contract took away any ability to take a home run fence at any position, on offense, on defense. They had to basically suck it up and go after mid-tier guys and depth pieces to fill out the remainder of their defense. And what happens in those moments? What happens when you're picking between 25 to 30 every single year? You don't have the ability to get almost guaranteed blue chip talent. You have to get not diamonds in the rough, but you need to hit on players that might be a 30% chance of being a blue chip talent. So Bean, and this is the part you can criticize, did not hit on a high enough level on those. The question is Bean drafting because of who he thinks the best player is? Or is he drafting based on what the coaching staff wants to work with? We don't have those answers. And that's kind of the problem. You start accumulating more of the same players. Based on the way the Bills draft linebacker, it's clear McDermott prefers undersized, quick linebackers. Based on how Bean drafted corners, it's clear that McDermott would rather have a 6th-round pick who's comfortable in his system than a high-round pick that is very athletic but raw. Based on how McDermott runs his system, it's clear he doesn't like playing young safeties immediately, and he thinks that they need time to learn what they're doing. So you're a GM, and you're giving him some of these molds of clay, and your head coach isn't even using them. He's not even giving them a chance early on. Yeah. And then you go to the D-line. Landon Jackson couldn't even see the field this year when he was healthy. TJ Sanders was horrendous when healthy. Are these D linemen the guys that Bean thinks are the best of the best? Or are they guys that fit the system? Because when you're only going to rush 4 players, you can't just prioritize pass rush. Why? Because if you prioritize pass rush, then you're going to have no gap integrity, and then you're going to get killed in other areas. So
you got to mention also like the Puna Fords and the
specific type players. And the question that we will never have the answer to is whether Bean operated in a way to where he was delivering McDermott what he thought McDermott needed, or if he was giving the Bills the best players available. And I think what we clearly have some intel on is that McDermott had specific types of guys he liked. The question is, did Bean not swing for the fences because certain guys he wanted, McDermott wouldn't consider them good? And we will never know because that's not going to come out. Bean is not going to, at this press conference, be like, well, I just drafted what McDermott told me to. And McDermott's never going to be like, yeah, I basically told him that I needed this and this is what I need. They're a team. They work together. And I'll close it by this. I think Bean has a poor draft record early in drafts. He's had some hits. He's had some misses. But I don't think all of his misses are his own. And I don't think all of his hits are his own. And I think at the end of the day, the only person that knows who is accountable for what is Terry Pegula, unfortunately. And we're not going to get those answers. And the one other point, too. It is customary when you are a general manager in the NFL that before you get fired from a job, that you have an opportunity to at least hire one of your own head coaches. I know that they're tied at the hip, but Bean came into a situation where McDermott was the one already there. Bean never had a chance to get his own head coach. He never had a chance to put his own special spin on things. This could simply be Terry being like, McDermott, I've given you 9 years. I like you. I trust you. I like Bean. I trust Bean. This doesn't even need to be personal by Terry. Terry might like both of them, and this is just simply professional. I don't think you're going to get it done, and I feel like I owe Brandon Bean at least one opportunity to see if he can get it done. And I know the semantics of this, the optics of this are horrible. None of us are inside the building. Everybody is speculating, and I think so much of the speculation could be off base It's bothering me because I would have fired them both, but people are acting like the Bills are about to go in drought 2.0, and that's crazy talk.
Just chiming in here. Few things. First, I look back at Bean. I've been thinking about the moves he's made, and if the speculation about Johnny Utah, what he said about Bean having more autonomy recently with decisions. Well, this offseason, he decided to extend Greg Rousseau, Terrell Bernard, Christian Benford. If those were Bean decisions, I don't know. Again, you could play the game of when did McDermott and that's why I wanted them both gone, because this is what it's going to create. And we're going to sit here all day, and for whose narrative, whatever narrative you want to dive into, if Bean has a great offseason and draft this year, you know what people are going to say? Sean McDermott was the problem. It was his selections. He had too much control of the organization. And if Bean fails, well, it was a Bean problem. McDermott was scapegoated, and that's the end of the story.
Didn't we do that with
So
Diggs?
if I look at what?
Didn't we do that with Diggs? We said Diggs was the problem. The Bills go to the AFC Championship the next year. We say, Diggs, he'll never be anything. And then he goes to a 4-13 Patriots team, becomes their number one receiver, and now he's one game away from being in the Super Bowl. But
Diggs wanted out. McDermott was fired.
I agree. I'm just talking about the narratives. Like we always.
Can I just continue a little bit?
Yeah. I'll let you say. All I'm saying is, we all like Diggs until we didn't like Diggs anymore.
Correct. And that's how it goes. I look at 2017. McDermott comes in. Whaley's still the general manager. They hit on Trey White that year. They hit on Deion Dawkins. That was McDermott. I don't know how much Shea Whaley had on that draft. They signed Milano, or they drafted Milano that year as well. And then Poyer and Hyber brought in as free agents that year. So that's like 4 or 5 big names that you could say Bean, again, extended those guys or kept them around. But I think McDermott did start his career with a good track record. And again, we don't know how much say he had. I know Josh Allen, Bean gets credit for that, but if you want to play the game that Bean had say on this and that, or McDermott had say on this or that, who says he didn't have say in the quarterback of the franchise that he's the head coach of? So I think we could play this what if game all day. The fact of the matter is, I think they both should have been gone. As much as they both contributed to the organization, they both failed. Brandon Bean has handed out $21 million combined to Curtis Samuel and Joshua Palmer, 2 guys in the wide receiver room that have done absolutely nothing. Okay, Curtis Samuel had 1 game against Denver in the playoffs where he showed up, but he gave out $21 million to wide receivers that haven't done anything. And it's frustrating. So I look at the selections of Bean. I think he has struggled more, especially more recently as a drafter. And again, I know McDermott's had shortcomings in the playoffs. Josh Allen's had the ball the last 3 playoffs with the ball with a chance to win. They failed. He had it 30-30 in overtime against Denver. He had it down 3 against Kansas City. And he had it whatever the previous year before that. So we can sit here and say, I know Bunt understands this because he's preached it. But again, I get the scapegoat thing with McDermott. I see the side of it because it really did feel like this year, and I know I had my criticisms. I tweeted when they were down 21-0 to New England that I think McDermott and Bean should be gone, and I still do believe that. But I do understand the point of, I think it is a little scapegoatish in terms of Josh Allen is also a part of this conversation. So not only are we fans are neglecting Brandon or Sean McDermott's impact on the situation, and they're neglecting Josh Allen's impact on the situation in terms of the narratives right now, which I think all 3 are responsible. You can't get rid of the quarterback. That's why I think you just start from scratch. And that's why I don't want Joe Brady around back again. That's why I don't want Brian Daboll back, because I just want new. I want fresh. I want new voices. And that's why I just wanted to clean house totally. But again, Allen's 30. I understand why you might want to keep some continuity with the scouting department and all that with Bean and promoting him, which again, I think crazy. I want it both gone. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents. I think Bean is just as responsible as McDermott. And for that reason, I think both should be gone, just based off of, again, we can play the what ifs of this guy drafted, what contracts he gave. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Whether McDermott's hands were on it or not, whether Bean has more authority than he does now, or compared to years past, like it all happened, man. Like they fell short no matter what. They lost. They couldn't get past the AFC Championship with Josh Allen at quarterback. Brandon Bean was the general manager. Sean McDermott was the coach. They should both be gone.
Well, let me ask you guys, as far as the players go, and you said exactly, AJ, whatever they thought of Sean McDermott, however much they love Sean McDermott, they couldn't get the job done. You could say, of course, this last playoff game, especially in the last two, a lot of coulda, shoulda, wouldas, 3-point losses. If you change one play around, if one connects, then we're talking about a different story. But ultimately, it falls on the players to execute. So when the players say, they're coming out with tweets and Instagram saying this is BS, WTF, why is this going down? Why is Sean being blamed? And ultimately, they're the ones that have to be accountable. But my question to you guys is, obviously there's players that have developed a relationship with Sean and are close with him. And obviously they come back to the team when they can't find success elsewhere. So they accept being a role player here and they're grateful to Sean for it. But how many of those players would be so upset that they would, once free agency comes, or maybe even pound the table and ask Bean for a trade? How many players would revolt and say, hey, get me off this team if you're not going to have Sean here? And there's another point to be made that maybe, not that Sean McDermott didn't build a good culture, but maybe some people are speculating, well, maybe it was a little too kumbaya, at least in recent years. And obviously Ty Dunn's article showed that Sean had a little bit of I don't want to say a mean side, but certainly a little bit of an unhinged side as far as, I think, what was it? The wide receivers coach got a truck as a present, and he didn't particularly care for that. Yeah. And obviously holding that mirror up to Sean seemingly maybe toned him down a little bit, not unlike who was the Giants coach, won the Super Bowl in the middle 2000s? Tom Coughlin. There were certain, things levied against him. And once he calmed down, the Giants got a little bit better and they went on another run. Maybe you could say Sean wasn't the same coach that he was in the early half of his run with the Bills. And maybe he was a little more player friendly, but maybe what this team needs is a little bit more, not accountability, because I think there was a good culture of accountability, but a little bit more, let's stop, trying all to be friends and be family, and just realize this is a business and this is a sport. And if you don't get the job done when you're expected to, then there's going to be consequences, and your coach is ultimately going to face those consequences. So you can't really, say, why is Sean being fired when you didn't get the job done for him and he ultimately didn't get the job done for you? But is there ultimately any concern about, players revolting and leaving in droves, maybe not in droves, but maybe leaking out here and there, and basically losing the locker room before the next coach even comes in, I guess?
None, in my opinion. It's what I will say is, I think what you're describing, Sean actually is a lot of those things. Like, I think Sean is disciplined and he's very strict and
very structured, very routine.
Yeah, structured, and holds people accountable. So I actually think Sean is all of those things. I think Sean tried to loosen up a little bit over the years because he realized that his team was a little bit tense in moments, and that, like, you'd see Sean try to do the snow angels with Josh. I think Sean tried to open up as a person. The one thing I will always say, I think Sean is a top 5 to 10 coach in the NFL. I think he's a great human being. I think he's a great leader of men. I think he does things the right way, and he genuinely cares about his players and being a good human first and foremost. I think the issue I have isn't that the players don't respect him. The players love him. Obviously they respect him a ton. It's more so that when you continuously lose in heartbreaking fashion in crazy ways over and over and over and over again, that strikes me as a team that is tense or anxious in big moments. And normally that's symbolic of your leadership. And I just have the question of, why are they not playing more free? Why are they tensing up in these moments? And yes, in this Denver game, you could say, well, they had injuries and Dane Jackson's on the field. But the Bills defense was already trending the wrong way before Dane Jackson went on the field and they allowed a touchdown. I don't find it a coincidence that 3 of the leaked names so far are Davis Webb, Joe Brady, and Brian Dable. What do all 3 of those candidates have in common? They all have a pre-existing relationship with Josh Allen. And they're all guys that Josh Allen is known to have a good relationship with. I'm not saying Josh Allen needs to have a friend be his head coach because that could be a horrible thing. But
Brian Dable is known to be the guy that challenged Josh a little bit more than maybe other coaches subsequently have, correct?
I think I think Josh needs somebody that he's not buddy with, but somebody that he can relate to a little bit more and be more comfortable with.
Someone that can rip him apart, and then the next drive they can celebrate together. That's what he needs.
But like
seriously, he needs a guy
that's kind of like his personality. Like Tom Brady didn't need somebody ripping apart Tom Brady because Tom Brady would go crazy himself. Same with Peyton Manning. You'd see them on the sidelines. A wide receiver would make a mistake, and they're killing the person. And I'm not saying I need an alpha male that's going to be constantly ripping every teammate to shreds, but that's not Josh Allen. Josh isn't going to go to a teammate and just yell in their face for 20 seconds straight and just put them down. Josh almost needs that guy to almost do it to him. Like, Josh, wake up. Like, what are you doing? Like, you can't be running.
He's not a Rottweiler. He's a golden retriever, but you can piss off a golden retriever enough to where he's going to snap.
Correct.
The golden retriever is good. It's a good quality. But sometimes the golden retriever is too lackadaisical when the game is on the line or when it's a big moment. And I think what the Bills need is they need a head coach that can relate to Josh more on his level. So maybe they can find a way to get him at that dialed in. I'm not saying that Josh hasn't been dialed in with Sean McDermott. He's obviously had great moments and amazing like stats and everything. But I just think nobody's ever asked him, like, what does Josh Allen want out of a head coach? What does Josh Allen need out of a head coach? Josh Allen never got to help get somebody that he actually wanted. He came to Buffalo. Sean McDermott was his coach. Sean helped develop him, and he kind of just goes along with the punches. I think Josh respects Sean McDermott, respects the hell out of him, and knows he's a good human being and thinks he's great. Sometimes you ask a professional athlete privately, like, hey, if you had it your way, what would you want? And I think Josh might need something a little bit different. And I think this is a big part of it too, is when your defense, in great stat from the Tyler Dunn article, that in the playoffs, in elimination games, the Bills have had 52 non-kneel drives allowed. They've allowed a touchdown on 25 of those and a field goal on 13 of those. So the Bills are allowing points on nearly 75% of their defensive drives in elimination playoff games. They're allowing 3.83 points per drive in elimination games over the Sean McDermott era. That would
be the highest in NFL history.
Highest in NFL history. I'm just telling you, like, there's really pun intended, there's really no defense of that.
33.2 points per game allowed in those 6 playoff losses. Yeah. Am I to understand that there were no sacks in those particular losses?
That's another issue. No pressure. And you know what the difference, and this is actually backed by the metrics. And a lot of people, I've not heard this talked about in Buffalo media enough. So what's the difference between the playoffs and the regular season for the Bills defense? Besides like the points allowed. You're going up against better quarterbacks.
Yeah.
So what is the whole point of the nickel defense? It's a pass-based defense. You allow teams to run, and then teams can take things underneath, and then they have to drive down the field. Why does the Bills defense typically do better in the red zone than they do inside the 20s? Well, it's because the field condenses and you have less room. And historically in the past, the Bills create takeaways and they make havoc plays, and that's how they have success. Recent years, especially this year, those plays went down. What happens in the playoffs, according to the advanced metrics, is that when they play better quarterbacks on a consistent basis, those quarterbacks are taking everything the Bills are giving them. So basically, Joe Burrow, Pat Mahomes, Bo Nix, all of these guys in the playoffs, when they play the Bills, they're taking every freebie that's given to them. The Bills are used to teams not taking every freebie in the regular season. It's a defense that's meant like, oh, you're going to make a mistake about it, so you're not going to just keep taking every 5 yards that you can get. The playoffs, they do. And in the playoffs, the metrics show the Bills get less yards after catch on offense. They get less They don't like the offense is still very effective in the playoffs, but like it's a little bit down. In their defense though allows more yards after catch. They miss more tackles. They give up more underneath. They just don't do their job. They don't execute. And what that tells me is that as long as Sean McDermott is running a primary nickel defense, if he was to be in Buffalo, the defense was never going to get better in the playoffs unless they were playing lower level offenses. So,
unless somehow, some way they put together an outstanding defensive line who could actually impact the things. Like it never happened. They were never able to do it. Like it was Groundhog Day with all the different attempts they've done at it to get a unit that could stand up 4 straight and go at it to be able to do that, the scheme that you're describing right now. And if McDermott's hands were in on a lot of those guys, which we have seen in articles in the last couple of days, specifically Boogie Basham being one of the names mentioned, like then that's on him. Like if it was all to count out of his scheme and the D and specifically the D line, which is where I think Brandon Beane wants to build through the D line. I think that all smart teams should want to build through the D. You see how much a great defensive line can do for you in the playoffs and throughout a year and everything else. But if you've been identifying the wrong guys who just aren't going to get it done and guys aren't playing well in your scheme at that position, it's going to be hard to win.
You know what the final straw was, Jake? It's Bo Nix. You can tell, and you guys have killed me for this over the years. But what have I said the entire last couple of years? The Bills have a Kansas City problem. They don't have a playoff problem. When you go up against Bo Nix and he tears you apart, it's kind of hard to say, well, it's just a Kansas City problem. You just let like the 15th rated quarterback in the league go on a a game-leading drive with 55 seconds left. Like minus 2 receivers. They didn't have Troy Franklin. They had another receiver out. They didn't have their starting running back in J.K. Dobbins. So you let one of the most mediocre, you let a very average offense at that, missing 2 of their best playmakers, drive down on your defense and take a lead in a playoff game. AJ asked me last week, would you rather be up by 4 with 2 minutes left, or would you rather be down by 4? I told him I'd rather be up by 4. We're playing a mediocre offense. We should put this game away. The moment they allowed that touchdown, my entire faith that we would ever be able to do anything in the future with Sean McDermott was done. And
in this particular game, they've allowed drives of 73, 70, 69, 75, and 64 for 3 touchdowns and 2 field goals. I mean, at some point you have to be able to get a stop, especially with the number 1 pass defense in the league.
And one last thing I'll add to that too is a lot of people are talking about how the defense stepped up with the takeaway after the turnovers. And I do applaud the Bills defense. There was the 2 situations where they held Denver to the one situation where they held on the field goal. That's a huge stop right there. My issue is this. The James Cook fumble, obviously for the Bills win probability, huge fumble. You go from having a chance to go up 10-3 or 14-3 to you give the ball to Denver. But nobody talks about Denver had to go 70 yards to get a touchdown. Like, that's not points off of turnovers where I'm like, well, the defense was put in a bad spot. No, that's
Deion Walker had the play though too, the pick. The Bills offense, and then Allen threw a pick right back.
But like, those are some reasons. I will just say this: those are some reasons for optimism going forward. Like Deion Walker with a healthy Ed Oliver, like there is some guys on this team. But I'll just say this:
Michael Hoyt, once he's healthy,
Michael Hoyt might have a chance if he can stay healthy. But it's one of those things where when they lost to Kansas City last year, and obviously that the defense was horrible that entire game. What did the defense do in the one moment? They held Kansas City to a field goal to where the offense could at least have a chance to win the game. What's frustrating to me is this defense. It's almost like the Bills in the playoffs. Sometimes they get off to hot starts, then they fall apart for a while. And then they fall behind, like in this game, down 13 or 9 or whatever it is. They take the lead, and then they go back to like playing tense again. They just can't consistently put it together. And And that's kind of my issue with McDermott. No one's denying that this roster was weak, like weaker this year. But it's even when they had top 5 rosters in the NFL for a 3 to 4 year stretch, it was the same thing every single year. Like ultimately, I think this is why McDermott got fired. Because you look at the Bills from 2020 to 2023, those 4 seasons, they have a top 5 roster in the NFL all 4 of those seasons. And then now it's easier to be like, oh, McDermott coached them up this year. But it's kind of like Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh is never going to go worse than 9-8. Like, you could give him the worst roster in the NFL. He's going to go 9-8 with the 32nd ranked quarterback in the league. But you could give him the top 10 quarterback in the league. He's going to go 10-7. And that is what we learned with McDermott. At his worst, they're 11-6. At their best, they're 13-4. But they're never going to get the main objective done. While with Bean, there's the little bit of a thought of you had a stretch where at one point in time you had 5 former all-pro players on your defense. Yeah. You went from being a pass-heavy team with Allen to the number 1 rushing team in the league with James Cook. You went from a wide receiver-heavy team to a tight end-heavy team. You've shown adaptability to how you can attack and build an offense. The Bills went from a finesse offensive line to one of the most physical offensive lines in the NFL. Connor McGovern wasn't a star before he was in Buffalo. Spencer Brown was a 3rd-round pick right tackle that people had issues about his back spasms and didn't believe in him. You had David Edwards, who was coming off a head injury and was a backup his first year in Buffalo. You had Osiris Torrance, who you got in the 2nd round when people thought that you'd have to go take him in the top 30. So, like, he rebuilt that entire offensive line. I think Bean has shown that he has adaptability in how he can build a roster. That's why he ultimately gets this opportunity. But I will say this. I don't think this is Bean might get, for all we know, this president of football operations, it might just be a precursor to Brian Gaine or Terrence Gray getting promoted to general manager.
Yep.
Which, if that's the case, then you got a new guy in charge running that side of things. And then another thing that needs to be discussed: what type of guy is Bean going to bring in? If he brings in a Kubiak and then Kubiak gets a Jim Schwartz, I think Bills fans would be pretty excited about something like that. So it really depends on what he does. Not today, not tomorrow, but what he does with this coaching search, what he does as far as a staff that comes in. And then is he able to make a splash move in free agency or via trade or in the draft? Because I'm telling you, if the Bills get an A.J. Brown or a Jalen Waddle or a George Pickens, this fan base is about to explode again, and they're going to do a 180 from what they're doing right now.
Jake Partham, I got a question for you. I want your honest thoughts on this, because this is just kind of evolving over on X, the beautiful life of X. Tyler Dunn's article is back in the forefront of conversations. I think we're going to see this more and more. This is part of it from an article at DUER. I think it's DUERN. I don't know how to really pronounce it, but some person on Twitter posted this excerpt from his article, and it reads, and I quote, "One reason the Bills are confident moving forward is that Bean also played a major role in the team's renowned culture," says one source. "The GM makes a point to talk to employees in every part of the building, right down to the equipment and mailrooms. The same staffers who felt dread when the head coach entered a room felt joy when Bean walked in." So now the conversation, Jake, my question to you, does this make you wonder how much of Ty Dunn's sources were just Brandon Bean in 2023? Because that is the question being asked now. Adam Penzel over at Cover One quote tweeted it and said that. And Eric Turner responded with kind of a WTF at Ty Dunn. But Ty Dunn actually just responded live. Sorry, Jake. No, go. Jake, go ahead, and I'll tell you.
No, I want to hear Ty Dunn's response, but I do have a thought, too.
Ty Dunn said, "Wildly incorrect, Adam. I can assure you that."
There's zero chance.
First time I spoke to him was when we sat down in his office for a one-on-one in 2024. But Jake, go ahead on that. Like that excerpt. What are your thoughts on that?
I want to get very specific about the line and consider the sourcing from 2023 now, because that line about mailroom to everybody else is exactly what Von Miller used to say all the time in every interview. He used to make the mention of this is a culture.
Maybe Von's the source.
That's what I'm saying. Maybe Von Miller is the.
But that would mean Von likes Bean more than he likes McDermott.
Of course, Von likes Bean.
But Von got paid, and Von was also. Remember, he wanted to. Remember his whole talk of like, I want to shadow Bean, and because I want to be a GM in the future, and I want to.
I did a shot with Von Miller at the combine. He was there. He was mentoring Bean. I was at a private party. Von Miller was there talking about being a general manager. Of course, he backs Bean.
And Von Miller is a guy who likes to talk. We know that.
Oh, yeah.
We know Von Miller likes to talk.
But would that
what's your take? I want to hear Partham's take quick, though, on that.
At first, I thought you were going to be referencing the Sabres, current turmoil. But then you say, Sean McDermott was the dark cloud and Brandon Bean was the light. So it very reminiscent of Kevin Adams being the dark cloud that would just suck the air out of a room every time he went into it. But we've seen the Sabres play out. Obviously, there is a lightness to their play, and it's obviously playing out in the ice where they're actually winning games with the same personnel. I mean, they haven't made any big acquisitions or free agency pickups or trades or anything like that. So, is it possible that either the GM and or the coach on one or the other teams was more of the person that people didn't want to be around, and that this is the reason that Terry's seeing what's happening with the Sabres and how just taking one guy out of the front office can lighten the mood and let everybody play loose. And to your point, Bunt, how these guys were tightening up in big situations in the playoffs, maybe people were starting to put it together, or at least Terry was starting to put it together, that Sean was the reason for this?
I don't think that's necessarily – I would say this. The player reaction shows that the players love Sean McDermott.
Yes.
So they have his back. So if Carson was here, he would say that proves that they have a great culture because they love their head coach. I think what this quote also proves, though, is that inside one Bills drive, Brandon Bean is not looked at as some villain or some evil person the way that some might have said Kevin Adams was with the Sabres. This quote shows that inside of one Bills drive, that Brandon Bean is also very respected by different team employees and different people throughout the organization. And I would say this: Bean and McDermott were friends for 15 years. That's why McDermott brought Bean with him to Buffalo. They were on the same page at one point in time. They were very close and they had similar philosophies. I wouldn't doubt that Bean has a shit ton of allies throughout One Bills Drive, and I wouldn't doubt that McDermott has a bunch of allies at that building. But I will tell you, from how they conduct themselves, now they're both very professional when they're in front of like press conferences and stuff like that. McDermott is more of a reserved person who doesn't want headlines, who doesn't like, sometimes he tries to be funny and open up, but he's very much more so about his morals, being a good person, being a leader of men, and his structure and stuff like that. Bean has a little bit more pizzazz to him. He doesn't always show it, but like Bean will give you a quote like about the Rams and how it's crazy how they're going for it all, and that's not the way you do things. Like Bean will give you
a quote such as,
"There's idiots everywhere."
But like that's Bean is a little bit more of a like that type of personality. He's a little bit more outspoken, a little bit more like, I'll tell you how I feel, like how I think it is. And I think there's people inside those buildings that are going to appreciate different personalities. Some people are going to respect Sean for being the professional, like straight to business guy. And then other people are going to like a Bean that's a little bit more maybe relaxed and easier to talk to and have more open conversations. That doesn't mean one is better or one is worse. But I think at the end of the day, what that quote does kind of show is that the whole vilifying of Bean is probably overboard in this instance. What Bills Mafia is trying to do is they are mad that one guy got fired and the other guy didn't, and they're trying to vilify the person who won the power struggle. That's where this has gone too far. we can be mad. I think it's perfectly okay to be mad that Bean still has his job. That's fair. Like, if you think he should have gotten fired and he got a promotion, I can understand being mad. I think people are trying to frame Brandon Bean as a snake and as a horrible person and somebody that undercut Sean McDermott. When in the reality of this, I think the most likely situation is that Bean and McDermott consistently pled their cases to Pegula over the last several months of the regular season. And at the end of the day, just like when you have an arbitrator, you go to court, one side wins, another side loses. Terry Pegula was the arbitrator, and he chose Brandon Bean's side. And everybody's going to try to make it into something more, but I don't think it is anymore. I think it really comes down to Pegula just thought they had a better chance at being successful going forward if he kept Bean here. And another point on why he might have done it, kept Bean and not kept McDermott, and this wouldn't even be McDermott's fault. If you fire your general manager, you got to find a new general manager. And that's a tough search. That's something where Terry has to go to work and he has to do a lot of stuff himself. He needs to hire a firm to give him suggestions. He needs to get involvement on his players. And that's top level stuff.
His last general manager he hired, he had to hang out with for 9 months before he gave him the job. Actually,
that's what I'm saying. You fire a head coach. General manager does all the work in the next coaching search. Like, if we're being real, let's use the Sabres history as a precursor for this. He had Tim Murray, fired him because he made too many trades and wasn't successful. Brings in Botterill, who's suggested to him by the NHL. He felt backstabbed by the NHL because Botterill was supposed to be a can't miss GM prospect, and he failed. He failed so bad that he fired him and brought in a yes man who we kept for 6 years who didn't make the playoffs because it was somebody that he trusted. So should we be surprised that he chose to keep the general manager rather than needing to start another complex relationship? This is the easier decision for Pegula. And if Bills fans want to vilify anybody in this, I don't think it's Brandon Bean. It's Terry Pegula. But at the end of the day, if they win a Super Bowl next year, you're not going to give a crap. Right. So
but it's also ironic because he's been needled all the time over the years about having a director of hockey operation for the Sabres, and essentially he's doing that with the Bills now to sort of be 100%. A little bit more hands-off than he usually is.
And think about it, Terry's getting older. He's not some spring chicken. He's in his early 70s. I think 73 years old, around that point. As he gets older, do we think Terry wants to be more involved in the decision-making or more hands-off and just enjoy getting older? And eventually his kids are going to have to get involved in the business. This is the time where you find people that you trust to run your organizations. You take the weight off of your shoulders. You enjoy the product. And then eventually you integrate your kids more so they can take over the reins when you're older or you're not able to do it anymore. So,
not to mention, I think looking after his wife after everything that happened to her.
100%.
And I think with the Bean part of this, getting a promotion and everything else, it could be part of it with like, hey, Bean and Pegula had to make this decision together and hash out what the details are. And I think part of it is that the Terrence Gray, the Brian Gain of it all, like, hey, these guys are going to be GM candidates elsewhere at some point. If we want to
grooming them for several years.
Exactly. If we want to keep this stuff together, we want because a lot of the here's the one thing that I haven't heard enough of, and we're going to wrap up here the next 10 minutes or so we can get to the Sabres game and everything else. And AJ, I'll go to you next for your final thoughts and around the horn, and we'll go from there. The one thing that I haven't heard enough talked about, and it's because and I haven't thought about it enough, but I do think it permeates throughout this whole decision, is I thought Sean McDermott was just – I thought that, we had heard from Pegula, at least in the past, that he loved the Steelers model of things and just the continuity and the structure of the organization and everything, having that identity and everything else. And I just kind of thought Sean McDermott was the Chuck Noll of that situation, where he was the guy that was going to be, defining the culture and everything going forward. Turns out that everything that's happened, we're going to continue to find stuff out. Brandon Beane's going to be that guy. So that's just what it is. It is what it is. That's a more modern structure of a football team. I would argue that it probably is having that, continuity in the front office as much as anything else, and not having to get to these positions where you have power struggles with a head coach and everything else. We've seen it turn out poorly a lot of times when head coaches have too much roster power. New England is the biggest one to talk about, right? Like that's the one that everyone's going to always point back to. But keeping Beane, like the importance of having in an organization continuity, consistency, and keeping those things similar. A lot of great organizations have great continuity, and keeping Beane on and keeping the front office, whatever the coaching staff changes happens, having that front office structure remain, having that the not having a brain drain of your entire organization. You might have a brain drain of a coaching staff, but not your entire organization to rebuild this thing on the fly with Josh Allen in place. Because I think it'd be crazy and I think that's, Mike, what you were saying, like fans have gotten a little crazy overboard with the reaction to it. It's like, listen, like there's the envy. The organization is still something that a lot of teams in the league envy for some reason. We're going to find out if Sean McDermott, if removing him from that situation changes that. We will find that out. But keeping the structure in place doesn't have to be a bad thing, because continuity among great organizations usually is a good thing. And if people are more talking about what part of the continuity they didn't keep, and that's fair because it's going to be all materialistically changed forever now. But something to be said of wanting to keep your organization in line while it's had success if you're making such a major change, rather than blowing it all out of the water and putting yourself in flux too. But AJ, then round the horn to Parthy, just final thoughts. And also here's your prediction for the end of the episode. Who do you think / should be the next head coach of the Buffalo Bills?
Yeah. I guess I'll go with the guy everybody's talking about. I wouldn't be against. I know everyone's like against the defensive-minded guy, but this cycle, like, man, I wish it was last year. I wish Ben Johnson and Liam Cohen were out there. I don't really have too much strong of an opinion. Clint Kubiak's the guy, right? Started his career at A&M. Bounced around the league, was in Minnesota for a year, was in New Orleans for a year, now is in Seattle. He's got a good resume. Obviously, his father's been very successful. That's probably the offensive hire that I'm looking at. Davis Webb's also intriguing, younger guy, good friends with Allen. I don't know how that dynamic could work, but I think that's another name to mention. But my guy would probably be Clint Kubiak. That's the guy I want to go look at and go after. But like I said, other names, Davis Webb, Brian Flores, like I was talking about with the defensive minded, like I'm intrigued by that. I don't know if that would get us anywhere, but I think that's a name to keep in mind. I know Belichick's been thrown out around there, but Johnny Utah's joking in the chat that Belichick comes in and Allen turns into Darth Vader.
I would love that. By the way, that would be.
So that that would never happen. But Dable, I guess we'll see if he was partnered with Davis Webb or something like that. Joe Buscaglia from The Athletic wrote something about that. But I think Clint Kubiak's the guy for me. I'm also interested in the passing game coordinator over in LA. I forget his name right now, but I did some research. Yes. He's another interesting name, 35 under McVay. Obviously McVay's a winner. They're in the NFC Championship and doing great things. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm really focused on this press conference tomorrow. I wonder if any names will be released. I'm going to be all over that. So if you follow me over on Twitter at AJ my personal shout, I'll give myself a shout out. I'll be following that tomorrow morning because this is my last week. I start student teaching next week over for my last semester of school. So I'm kind of enjoying this last week of not normalcy, because I think normalcy will be actually working every day and getting home at 3:30. That's normalcy. But this week I kind of just relaxing and not having anything much to do besides finishing schoolwork. So I'll be doing that tomorrow. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And there's a lot of names, and we'll see where it goes. And I hope Brandon Beane makes the right call, along with Terry Pagula, to invoke some confidence in this fan base and change this thing from not knowing if they're going to make it to making it and winning that big one. And I hope that this new coach is able to do that.
Obviously, the least exciting prospects are just promoting Joe Brady or bringing back Brian Dable or Davis Webb. So I'd like to reserve judgment if they went that way, but it certainly wouldn't inspire a whole lot of excitement. As far as Clint Kubiak goes, I'm not as familiar with his work, but I did see a nice little comparison between him and Joe Brady as far as their offensive play calling and the results of it. So, like, Joe Brady has been third in EPA per play, second in offensive DVOA after Jacksonville, is only fourth after Denver, and second in drive success rate. The comparison to Kubiak is Kubiak's 14th in EPA per play, 18th in offensive DVOA in the regular season, and that goes to 10th after the San Francisco game, and 16th in drive success rate. So I don't know if this has anything to do with his personnel, his quarterback. Maybe other people see something in his play calling that that doesn't show in the raw numbers. If Clint Kubiak has a raw, generational prospect like Josh Allen, how much does that change? But I don't really have a favorite. I'm not as familiar with everybody's game. If they want to hire Clint Kubiak and everybody says he's the guy that's on the top of their top three lists, I'm all for it. An offensive mind as opposed to a defensive guy. And, he can go hire a defensive coordinator, let him run the show, and maybe not just worry about nickel defenses and maybe get some one-tech defensive linemen in here. And who knows? Who knows? I just wonder about, as we're closing the door on Sean McDermott, does his legacy basically become what everybody feared after every single postseason failure? It was increasingly, the names of Marvin Lewis and Marty Schottenheimer were getting invoked, and is his name going to be basically placed alongside these other coaches as just not being able to get it done in the postseason despite all the regular season success in the world? And I guess it's going to depend on how his successor goes. Like, you have Tony Dungy all those seasons with Tampa Bay that he couldn't get it done. John Gruden comes in the next year and wins a Super Bowl. And at the same time, Tony Dungy goes over to Indianapolis, and after a few seasons with Peyton Manning, he wins a Super Bowl. So it's very complex as far as how successful a new coach coming in with some of the old personnel and a generational quarterback. What was it? John Elway couldn't get it done with Dan Reeves, and then he gets a new offensive-minded head coach, and all of a sudden he's got the pieces around him to make a run in the Super Bowl. There's a lot of possibilities out there, obviously, and we'll be able to speculate and get a better idea for all those things as far as once they pull the trigger on whoever is going to be coming to coach the Buffalo Bills in the future.
McDermott's legacy is going to be determined based on what he does with the next franchise he goes to. Right now, he's in that odd middle ground of being one of the winningest playoff coaches of all time that has never coached in a Super Bowl. I believe he might have the most playoff wins or up there to never have coached in one. Now, he also coaches at a time where the 2 seed doesn't get a bye, and he's accumulated quite a few wins as a 2 seed in wildcard rounds that he wouldn't have gotten prior to 5 years ago. So the tough thing is this. Sean McDermott is not a Marvin Lewis. Marvin Lewis couldn't win at all in the playoffs, and it was inconsistent whether he was going to make it on a yearly basis.
Yeah,
I even think that Marty Schottenheimer is an unfair comparison too, because Schottenheimer couldn't win at the playoffs. He had a 5-13 playoff record, I believe. Sean McDermott has a I believe a 500 record in the playoffs, or one game over 500. So McDermott's in that tricky spot where he has, I think, a top 20 to 25 win percentage all time in the regular season. He went 98-50 in 9 years in Buffalo. Almost double the amount of wins compared to losses during in regular season play. Like, that's unbelievable. The conflict, and then you also have I ended a drought in Buffalo, a historic drought, and I'm part of drafting and developing Josh Allen. So he has a lot of great things on his resume right now. But there's also the disappointment of you had 6 years of prime Josh Allen, and you couldn't get to one Super Bowl during that era. That's a huge negative in his resume. So what's going to happen is it's going to depend on what he does in his next job. Dan Reeves, I think he went to either 2 or 3 Super Bowls in Denver, like you said, ended up going to Atlanta later in his career and took the Falcons to a Super Bowl. The problem is he lost all of them. So Dan Reeves has like a career 195 and 170 type record. He's a great coach, a lot of wins, but he's not looked at as an all-time great. And to be honest, if Dan Reeves had stayed in Denver more and accumulated more wins, maybe he would have had a chance of being a Hall of Famer like Marv Levy. But Marv Levy did something historic. He had 4 Super Bowl appearances in a row that kind of gave him that little boost. And though people did consider that an all-time great team. If McDermott goes to an organization like Vegas and then spends 4 or 5 years there and wins on average 7 games a year and goes 7-10, like 3 seasons, then mixes in like a 10-7 year and a 9-8 year, McDermott's legacy will be that he was a good coach who was carried by one of the best quarterbacks in the game, and that his record wasn't as good as his record was better than what he really was. But if McDermott goes to Baltimore or he goes to Pittsburgh and he continues to win 10 to 12 games a year and he eventually wins a ring, he's going to be he'll be a no doubt Hall of Famer in that moment. So it really just depends on what McDermott does the rest of the way. Now, as far as the head coaching candidates, I liked what you brought up about Kubiak. I'm guilty of this. We're all talking about him. Let's be real. How many Bills fans have actually spent time diving into Clint Kubiak, watching the Seahawks and seeing what they do and knowing if it translates well to Josh Allen and what the Bills want to do? Not many. I'm going with the name because that's what a lot of other people are suggesting. And it seems like that's a guy that the Bills are high on. To me, it doesn't need to be him, but I like the idea. He's a 38-year-old offensive-minded guy, seems like an up-and-comer, the son of a great coach in Gary Kubiak, who won a Super Bowl as the Broncos head coach. There's definitely some coaching lineage and some stuff that's going to get passed down, just like a Mike Shanahan transferred down all of his knowledge to Kyle Shanahan. Something like that I would be okay with. The Dable, Davis Webb, Joe Brady, those are interesting. Davis Webb is 30 years old. He has never been an offensive coordinator. It's a risky decision if you name Davis Webb the head coach of a team that is in a Super Bowl or bust era. And is he ready for that type of responsibility? I think that's a risk. I wouldn't mind him as an O coordinator or something in that capacity. Dable, I think, is interesting too. I've been critical of him with the Giants.
Terrible coach, dude.
I've been very critical of him with the Giants. I think he screwed up a lot of things in New York, that he handled things very poorly. He was immature with how he handled his team. The X factor of this is the Josh Allen relationship. If you ask me, Brian Dable, do you think he'd be a successful head coach in half the organizations in the league? I'd probably say no. But does he have the right touch with Josh Allen? If he does, I could be open to that, but it's not my number one choice. I think the Bills could sell it to half the fan base, because while there will be some fans that are like, this guy's been losing, he's a retread, Bills fans will eat up a Buffalo hometown guy returning home who's close to Josh Allen being the head coach of the team. Maybe not the ones on Twitter and stuff like that, but just the regular blue-collar Buffalo fans, they'll like that move. Joe Brady is the move that I think the most Bills fans would hate, but I'm actually secretly a little intrigued by. We don't know if Joe Brady runs the offense he runs because that's what he believes in, or if that's what Sean McDermott wants him to run, or if it's a combination of that and not having enough weapons in the pass game. You give Joe Brady a Jalen Waddle or an A.J. Brown or George Pickens, does this offense look differently? I'll tell you what, once they got Brandon Cooks, who's 31, 32 years old and half the player he used to be, the Bills started taking more shots downfield. And while they didn't complete a ton of those, some of them were drops, other ones were just off the mark, they looked a lot dangerous. Now, they turned the ball over a lot, but like you look at what they did against Denver, they had 450 yards against a premier defense on the road. And it could have been close to 500 if they ruled a catch and not an interception. I think when I watch Joe Brady, there's a little bit of Ben Johnson, young coordinator, ahead of the trends, relatable. Like you see Ben Johnson in Chicago taking his shirt off. I could see Joe Brady doing something stupid like that. I could see Joe Brady dapping up all the players and just talking to them like he's literally one of the receivers on the team. So the thing is with Joe Brady, like it feels like there's a good chance he's going to be a head coach somewhere in the near future. Do the Bills end up being like, man, like we don't even need to leave the building. We think we got somebody. We want you to be the head coach because we're afraid of losing you. I don't think that ends up being the case because the Bills are already fighting a horrible PR disaster. And I don't think they're going to want to double, triple down by hiring the one person that everybody in Bills Mafia doesn't want. But I do think Joe Brady's a way better candidate than what Bills fans give him credit for. And then that leaves me, is there an outside person name that we don't know about that could be either a veteran head coach? Like, could the Bills be in on a Mike Tomlin or a Mike McCarthy? I wouldn't want them to be, but could that be a possibility? Then another possibility, like this one is the 0.01%.
Yep.
But I know people in the local media will call me an idiot for even suggesting this. Bill Belichick. And
Not where I was going.
But I don't know where you're going. I'll let you say that one. But Bill Belichick is intriguing. And if not for just this reason. He's the best defensive mind in the history of football. You paired that with a Josh Allen at quarterback. You just hire a good offensive coordinator. You really just have Belichick worry about the defense. Now, I know why they'll never do it. You have the whole Jordan Hudson girlfriend situation. He's in his mid-70s. Does he want to live in cold Buffalo, New York after having a year off and then going to UNC? It's very, very, very unlikely, improbable, and not even worth discussing.
But how much does spite drive Bill too to want that? The fact that New England is the team ascending up next to it has to at least cross his mind.
That's why it would be so interesting because, like, say the Patriots get to the Super Bowl this year and they lose, and then next year Bill Belichick comes in. The Bills win the AFC East. The Bills go to the Super Bowl and they beat the Patriots along the way to get there. You have one of these if Belichick, which, like I said, never going to happen, came to the Bills, you'd have, and he won a Super Bowl, it'd be the most complicated legacy maybe in the history of the NFL, where you have a coach coaching for a division rival that he dominated for 2 decades, he absolutely despised by a fan base, and then delivers that said fan base their first ever title, making him the most beloved figure outside of Josh Allen in that fan base's history, which means he would be beloved by 2 cities that absolutely hate each other. And we would probably put a statue up of him. And it would just be the ultimate irony that it's too good to not happen. But I'll just go with Clint Kubiak and give me a defensive coordinator that knows what to do.
All right. I will say with Clint Kubiak, it's the reason I think he's at the top of my list for a lot of the reasons that we've already discussed. But about over 10 years ago, John Fox got fired after winning the division 4 straight years and making an AFC championship game. And who replaced him and won the Super Bowl the next year? Gary Kubiak. And if there's an outline for what the Bills need, because whoever comes in, it's Super Bowl or bust. Like, that's the thing. If you're a first-time head coach, Clint Kubiak, Joe Brady, whoever the first-time head coach is going to be, like, it's more pressure than you ever would have possibly imagined stepping into your first-time head coaching job. I agree with you on the things about Brady. I don't think from a PR move for the fans would be happy with a Joe Brady move, but from everything that you said, like, if he was running what Sean wanted him to run, you have to consider his vision. If you think that it's a different vision, he's also a guy that 5 years ago was talked about as the next big thing when he first got the job in Carolina. So there's all of that. I wouldn't hate the Dable thing. I don't love it either. My pie in the sky move is Kyle Shanahan has 1 year left on his deal.
I almost said that. You knew where I was thinking earlier.
That's where I was hoping you were going. If Kyle Shanahan, you can get a hold of Kyle Shanahan's agent and talk to him seriously, listen, have you tapped out everything you can do with this team? And do you want to coach Brock Purdy for the next 15 years or Josh Allen for the next 7? And you've been so close to a Super Bowl too, getting over the same team we need to get over this year. Like, is it better off you just come here? I wouldn't. I don't know. That's the thing too. Is Bean going to give up like a premium draft pick to do that? Unless Kyle can also power play the shit out of this and be like, I'm not coming back next year no matter what. Like, just get me out of here type thing. Like, if he wanted to flame his way out, he could. It depends what that is. It's like.
So improbable, but it would be so amazing.
They have to turn over every possible leaf in this search. And that's why I'm okay if they take time. I'm okay if they wait to talk to Clint Kubiak or Nate Scheelhaas or whoever after the Super Bowl if they need to even. Like, I think guys that don't get jobs are gonna or that are thinking about these jobs and aren't far along in the process. You kind of want to listen to what the Buffalo Bills have to say at this point. But let's go watch some Sabres hockey. Thank you guys for being here. AJ, Partham, Mike Bunt, Jake Micah signing off. Thank you to our sponsor, Picasso's Pizza. Get your Picasso's Pizza anywhere in Western New York and nationwide at picassospizza.net. We'll see what happens. Yeah, tomorrow, 10 a.m. going to be a appointment viewing in Western New York for everybody. But there's a lot to happen over the rest of the off season that we'll be breaking down. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for another great football season and all the support we've had throughout the season. We'll talk soon. And as always, go Bills.
Let's go Bills.